VC, confirm F9 in startup.
Falcon 9's in startup. Stage 1, Stage 2, pressing for flight.
T-minus 30 seconds.
Ground healing closeout complete.
T-minus 20 seconds.
Falcon 9's configured for flight.
15. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Lift off of the Falcon 9. Falcon 9 had cleared the towers.
Looking at the Falcon 9 powering its way through the low atmosphere as it heads into the parking low Earth orbit. First stage continues to burn under the power of 9 Merlin 1D engines. We're already through the throttle down and throttle up phase. Coming up to transonic, let's listen in. Currently, Falcon 9 has gone through the supersonic speed transition, what we call going transonic. This is also the period of maximum dynamic pressure on the Falcon 9, where the loads on the vehicle, a combination of the density, the atmosphere at the lower altitudes, and the speed of the rocket, create the greatest loads on the Falcon 9. We've just heard the call in that MVAC-D chill-in looks good. We've begun passing liquid oxygen to the turbo pump on the second stage engine, getting that turbo pump cold as we get ready for ignition of the upper stage, coming at about T plus 2 minutes and 44 seconds. We're going to listen in. Major activities coming up now. At 2.5 minutes into flight will be main engine cutoff, followed by stage separation and upper stage engine ignition. Let's listen in.
This is the OSM.
You hear the cheering. The upper stage engine is lit, completing the sequence of shutdown of the first stage, separation from the first stage, ignition of the upper stage engine as we continue on into the low Earth orbit. That'll be the first of 2 orbits we're headed for tonight. The first, somewhat circular low Earth orbit. Then, after a coast period, we'll go into what is essentially a large egg-shaped orbit, the geostationary transfer orbit, which will take the Falcon 9 with the JCSAT-16 spacecraft to an altitude of about 36,000 kilometers. You can see the upper stage nozzle. Here comes fairing separation.
Fairing separation, confirmed.
And we have fairing separation. With that, let's talk to the team down on the floor.
And as the second stage is carrying the satellite now free of the fairing up to that low Earth orbit, or the beginning, that initial low Earth orbit before moving to GTO, the first stage is heading back towards the drone ship. Now, occasionally people think that a drone ship landing is harder than a land landing, and that's sort of true, but not for the reasons they think. A low Earth orbit mission, which can return to either land or the drone ship, is easier than a geostationary transfer orbit mission, which can land only on the drone ships. That's because a GTO mission requires a lot more speed than a low Earth orbit mission, and that means it requires more propellant. It even gets a little bit trickier than that, so we've got a nice animation to show you what's up. Here we have a picture of the Falcon 9. We zoom in on the first stage. It's got liquid oxygen propellant on top and RP1 kerosene fuel on bottom. And as it burns through each of those propellants, the thrust that's produced is more or less constant. But it's harder to move, or harder to accelerate when it's heavier. Just like a pickup truck will accelerate slower when it's towing a lot behind it. So when you burn 20 seconds worth of fuel at the beginning of the flight, you've only added about 200 kilometers per hour to your speed. But 20 seconds worth of fuel when the rocket's almost empty, just before main engine cutoff, adds more than 2,000 kilometers per hour to your speed. So, sort of perversely, it's really the fact that we don't have much propellant left that allows us to reach the speeds required to reach GTO. And if you don't have much propellant left, of course, then you can't do a long re-entry burn to minimize the re-entry forces on the vehicle, and you get much less of the control that comes with a longer single-engine landing burn. So it's really the GTO landings that are hard, not necessarily whether the first stage is landing on a drone ship. So again, we are headed towards the drone ship on a GTO mission, so we don't get the boost back burn. We have a re-entry burn, but it's a bit shorter than what we're getting on some of our low Earth orbit missions. And we do manage to get a single engine landing burn, at least that's the attempt for this one, which means that we'll be able to have a longer control and longer descent, which is nicer because it's less forces on the rocket in that final descent. It can compensate for larger wind speeds, which is also pretty nice. So fingers crossed that's happening soon. Now, if you're interested in the math behind what's going on there in terms of the fuel and the speed, you can look up the Tsiolkovsky rocket equation, which explains a lot about how those two are related.
We're at T plus 6 minutes and 20 seconds. Things continue to go well for Falcon 9 carrying JCSAT-16 spacecraft into the low Earth orbit parking orbit. Looking at the upper stage engine, we've just heard the call out. Stage 1 entry burn has begun. This burn will last about 23 seconds. Let's listen for the completion of the burn.
Stage 1 entry shutdown.
And we've had shutdown of the first stage engine. That burn of 3 Merlin 1D restartable engines begins to slow down the first stage so that we can land on the drone ship out in the Atlantic Ocean. Meanwhile, the second stage continues to power and orbit. We're heading due east for that initial parking orbit. You can see the Merlin vacuum engine nozzle glowing white-red on the screen. That's normal. That's what we expect to see. Trajectory looks good. Power looks good. We're on course. Everything continues to go well at T plus 7.5 minutes. So let's turn it over to the team on the floor as we get ready for the landing burn of the first stage.
So as you've just seen, we have a lot of good stuff going on so far. Successful separation of our first and second stage. Second stage is carrying JCSAT-16 all the way out to geostationary transfer orbit. Right now we're waiting for the third and final burn to begin, which of course is the landing burn.
So the landing burn is going to occur, and we actually should be able to see it as from the video that's currently on deck of the drone ship. Now this video hasn't historically been the most reliable. We hope to bring you this high quality video as possible, but there's no Wi-Fi out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We are relying on a satellite link that is susceptible to the vibrations of the landing burn itself.
It's true. So when the rocket descends onto the drone ship, it starts to shake, and the satellite that's pointing up to communicate, or the satellite dish that's pointing up, we're just getting word that the landing burn's beginning. Focus your attention, and we'll see if we can see it.
Looks like we can see the exhaust gases just on the top of the frame.
Because those things have frozen, which, like we said, this speed, there's no Wi-Fi out in the Atlantic Ocean yet. So we can't bring you a status update, unfortunately. We would love to know as much as you.
We actually, back to the main mission briefly, we did just get a confirmation of a good orbit from the second stage. It's as excited as we all are to figure out what happened to that first stage. The primary mission today is to bring JCSAT-16 into geostationary orbit, and we're actually doing great on that front with our confirmation of good orbit.
So that good orbit is the initial stage. It's that initial low Earth orbit section before the second stage begins a second burn to turn that orbit from a circular...
I still love you for a successful landing on the drone ship.
It looks fantastic. That looks right. X marks the spot right in the center of the drone ship. It's always great to see one of our boosters come back down to the surface of the Earth. Hopefully we'll get a chance to take a look at that thing and hopefully get it flying sometime soon.
Yep, so that's, I guess, the completion of a secondary objective. It's important to remember that primary mission is the satellite, and we're going to move into a coast phase shortly, about 17 minutes long, while the second stage moves into the correct position to begin a second burn. And that second burn will change the orbit from that circular low Earth orbit into a giant egg-shaped orbit, where the top of the orbit is at 36,000 kilometers, which is the geostationary distance.
Now, before we get it there, like we said before, it does take a bit of time. So we have about 16-17 minute coast phase between basically until the next engine lights up again. We're actually going to be taking a break in a little bit. We hope that you stick with us. Of course, that's a great shot. Wow, that's awesome.
A fantastic shot.
But we hope you stick with us. We're going to be grabbing some coffee and wow, this is awesome.
We'll see you in 17 minutes after the coast to guide you through the second stage relight and hopefully a good separation.
So we're about 15 seconds until payload deploy. The shot that you see on your screen now, that is the nozzle of the second stage engine, which of course is not, it's not lit at the moment. We have cut it off for the second time as we have reached this preferred elliptical space. So we should have a shot of JCSAT-16 in just a few seconds. In fact, there it is now, and we're just waiting for it to release.
So you're looking at a shot from a camera that's on top of the second stage of the Falcon 9 rocket, looking towards, oh, and there it goes.
So there's our visual confirmation of a successful separation of JCSAT-16.
That about brings our mission to a close. It still remains to make sure that the satellite's operating properly, but once that gets fully spun up and moved into its orbit, then our part's totally over. So to recap, we had a successful on-time launch of the first stage and second stage altogether. The second stage continued on towards that low Earth orbit, coast phase, and then second burn, successfully deployed the payload as the first stage made it back to a successful landing on the drone ship from a geostationary transfer orbit, which is checking all the boxes.
At this point, we're about to conclude the webcast. We'd like to thank SkyPerfect JSAT Corporation, our customer. We'd like to thank the Air Force for allowing us to launch off of Cape Canaveral and the FAA. And most of all, thank you, the viewers, for tuning in on a Saturday night to watch us launch a rocket.
If you'd like to join us here at the SpaceX team, be sure to check out spacex.com/careers. Also, be sure to follow us on spacex.com, as well as Facebook, Twitter, and my personal favorite, our Instagram account. Also, finally, we'd like to dedicate this webcast to Kenny Baker. May he rest in peace, as he was the man that brought life to our favorite droid, R2-D2.